Hello and welcome back to the MCF channel and another episode of the MCF Racing Review. Today, delighted to be talking about MotoGP for what seems like the first time in forever, although it did fly by that winter, didn't it? Thanks everyone who's been liking, subscribing, sharing the content and obviously giving feedback on the first couple of videos we've done this last few weeks. Just chuffed to get it off the ground and moving. So, always been a huge fan of the race series. We're going to be trying to be consistent with this, as I've said, try and cover as much of the content around the core races that we can, and try and develop it. You've got to bear with us. This is the first time we're doing this sort of stuff, so the show will sort of evolve. We'll probably add new features in. We'll mess around with the format, and we do want other people from the channel to come in. So obviously my name's Gavin. I'm running the show with my old man Steve. You might have seen him on the channel earlier this week. My brother Reese is obviously a big part of our family as well, and he'll be getting involved from time to time too. So we're going to try and basically get everyone involved in the racing review stuff, but keep your eyes peeled for other types of content as well. We are going to be doing some workshop content in the next couple of weeks. So yeah, make sure you like, subscribe, follow the channel, share it with the people that you know that are in the even the motorcycle industry, or just your bike friends, your biker friends, and we'll go from there. So yeah, where were we? Thailand, MotoGP this weekend. Absolutely buzzing to see them all back on track. It's the big show, isn't it? Listen, we love World Superbikes and obviously passionate about that. There's been iconic racing for years in World Superbikes, and at Phillip Island last week, as we touched on earlier in the week on the other review. It's great to just see racing at Phillip Island, isn't it? Regardless of what it is, but a little bit, unfortunately, processional, wasn't it? Because Buliga is just dominant. And then going into this weekend in Thailand, the news, the testing sort of buzz, all the information around Mark, how is he going to do with, with the injury? How is he going to be straight back at the sharp end? All these sorts of things we were thinking about. And you get all these news lines and all these sorts of, all the experts talking about what's going to happen in terms of those testing results and who did what and who was fast and what team's going to be best. And I think it's hilarious. We all predict it wrong every time, don't we? I don't think anyone was saying first race weekend of the season we'd see Aprilia be as dominant as they have been, or as close to the front. And we'll go into results in a minute, and we'll break down the manufacturers as we do, and we'll talk about some of the leading questions as well towards the end of the podcast. But in overview, it was a fantastic weekend of racing, wasn't it? We're going to keep our reviews at the moment to MotoGP only. We might open it up to Moto2 and Moto3 down the line, but we're going to try and focus on short, sharp content to begin with. So in that, with regards to that, we'll try and focus on the main races and the sprint from MotoGP this weekend. So yeah, what were we expecting? I think we were expecting, considering what Mark did last year, is he going to come in and do the same thing this year? Is he going to just literally walk it, and is it going to be tough for anyone to get close to him? And then we come in on Friday and we start seeing some timesheets, and we start seeing some lap times, and you start seeing Bezzecchi just absolutely blitzing it, carrying on that form from the end of last season. And it's so brilliant to see, Ducati being knocked off their perch a little bit. Listen, we're all huge Ducati fans on the channel. And we're all Marc Marquez fans, and the rest of the Ducati riders as well. We want to see them all do well, don't we? But you do in racing. You want to see competition. And this weekend, it looked like Mark was having to work hard for it, to be at the top there. And is that the injury? Is that how the Ducati is set up at the moment? And getting to grips with, which is always a little bit of a tough circuit because of the temperatures and all those sorts of things. But yeah, blimey, what a weekend of racing. So in the sprint. If you haven't seen it, you saw Pedro Acosta, handed the win. You can't say gifted, he bloody earned it, didn't he? But ultimately, he was handed the win by Mark on that last lap because of because of a controversial overtake from Mark to Pedro a lap or two earlier. So the result in the sprint ended up being Acosta, Marquez, Raul Fernandez. So yeah, Aprilia there, with Aigura in fourth in the sprint and Jorge Martin in fifth in the sprint. So again, that Aprilia just showing its strength and absolutely bringing it all weekend. And then where are the Ducatis in the sprint? You had Binder in there, you had Mir, then you had Di Giannantonio, and really the Ducatis just weren't up there, and it was just interesting to see that Mark was the only one really being able to hold that baton up there. And in commentary, if you watch the TNT feed, you will have seen them talking about how he maybe didn't look as comfortable. I mean, how is he going to be comfortable? He's had another surgery. The man keeps defying logic with how he can come back, this Mark, and still be at the sharp end and still want to take the risks that other riders do. But really, you've got to say the rider of the day yesterday was Pedro. He's my rider of the weekend. I don't know if he didn't win that or anyone else. I mean, he was fantastically aggressive and just a real ding-dong race, which is just brilliant to see. Obviously, earlier on in the sprint yesterday, we saw Bezzecchi fall off super early. Didn't even get to show his pace really. So you've got to think if Bez was there, would he have run away with it like he did the main race today? Maybe. But all in all, watching that battle at the front end, at the sharp end, for the lead of the race with Pedro and Mark, just going at it, and Pedro just not giving up an inch. Neither was Mark. Show that race to an F1 fan. That's what I say ultimately, and I'm not speaking. I'm not speaking from lots of knowledge of F1 on that. I just, if you're not a MotoGP fan, but you're a fan of any type of motorsport, watch yesterday's sprint race. It's 20 minutes long, and it will have you on the edge of the seat the entire time. I mean, the rest of the sprint, you saw, as I say, the Ducatis sort of feeling in line after that front sort of group of the Aprilias and Mark and Pedro. I mean, it was just great to see it off to a good start. Then interestingly, today with the main race, I started to feel like, right, well, what can Mark do in this then? How is his late pace going to be? How is Pedro's late race pace going to be? It's easier to have that pace throughout the sprint, isn't it? But what can you do when it's piping hot in Thailand? Track temperature's high. You've got that different composition rear tyre. How well can these riders from the sprint yesterday carry this form through? And then Bez hits the front, doesn't he? Great start compared to yesterday where Mark maybe had a slightly better start. Bez hits the front and never looked back. And disappointing. You want to see a race, some competition at the front of the race, don't you? But ultimately, Bez was just, hard to look past this weekend. He always had that pace, didn't he? So the podium today, Bezzecchi, then Pedro Acosta and Raul Fernandez again. And then you had Jorge Martin, Ayagura making up the top 5. No Ducatis in that top 5. And I think I saw a statistic today saying this is the first podium in 88 of the last podiums that Ducati haven't been on. So is it a changing of the guard at the front? I mean, it's obviously too early to say in the season, isn't it? It's a bit of an outlier, this track, with that. You have to use that different composition rear tyre, suits the Aprilia a little bit better. But, the first Ducati behind what would have been Mark today was Di Giannantonio. You've got then Binder and you see Morbidelli and Pecco in behind. It's interesting to see that swing of power. And we'll talk a little bit more about the dynamics that are emerging with this Pecco potentially moving to Aprilia and Pedro potentially getting his seat at factory Ducati later in the show today. But honestly, fantastic weekend of racing. There were some good battles today. Again, Pedro for me is the rider of the day today, just literally having it, never happy to accept a position, always looking to hunt people down. It's so good for the sport to see someone like him on the KTM doing so well. So if we go through the manufacturers, as I've said, I think easy to talk sort of down up today, and we'll start with Yamaha. I do have a question mark around Top Rack towards the end of this show today to sort of break down, but really if you think about Yamaha, I talked earlier about, you can't really take anything from testing. What we could take from testing was Yamaha off it, and it just came through today, didn't it? And yesterday. That bike is nowhere near where it needs to be. It makes you wonder why they didn't just stick with the inline 4 until the end of this season and just go straight into the 850s with a V4. What do we know, eh? They were trying to keep hold of Fabio. He continues to sort of voice his concern in his own way. Better result today than yesterday from what I recall, but they weren't on. You didn't see the Yamahas on screen barely at all, did you? Apart from the odd snapshot of Top Rack and the odd snapshot of Fabio. The rest, Miller and Rins, at the bottom of the field, battling with Michele Pirro and those. So tough, absolutely tough to see. Hard to see the season being a pleasant one for that team, or both of those teams. The Pramac Yamaha team and the factory Yamaha squad. I hope that you can see them knuckle down and get some results, and maybe they can take some learnings from this year into next year. That's what they've got to be hoping for, right? But blimey, it's tough to see that Yamaha down there. Fabio's got to be kicking himself. And it's so interesting to see what happens with that move. What's he going to do, Fabio? We've heard various different rumours, haven't we, about Honda for him. Have to see what happens. So yeah, Yamaha, tough weekend all in all. Honda, I'm not sure what I was expecting this weekend from Honda. They've sort of carried on that pace from last year. They seem to have a solid sort of foundation for the bike now. Seem to, that mid pack is where they sort of settled all weekend across the sprint and the main race. Looks like Johan Mir was the fastest of the group. Finished highest in both races. Well, I think he fell off in one, didn't he? But yeah, had a strong weekend pace wise, and then Marini behind him with Zarco and Moreira sort of a little bit behind. Really solid one for Moreira. Again, I didn't know what to expect. I haven't paid as much attention to him in Moto2 apart from last season, which obviously was very, very strong for him. But yeah, I mean, a couple of good results really. Solid sort of first weekend in MotoGP. What more can you expect when you're not on a Ducati or an Aprilia? He's done well on that Honda. So hopefully they can build on this sort of foundation. It'd be great to see some of those Honda riders battling for podiums this year. It's still going to be tough to break into that Ducati and Aprilia mix. Really, Pedro did that this weekend on talent, right? Brad Binder wasn't able to do it really. I know he had some better results this weekend, a solid weekend overall, but wasn't really mixing it with that top group. And only Pedro was. And you could see with we'll get onto KTM in a moment, but you could see with Pedro, although the Aprilia had some advantages, he was making that up on skill. And you wonder what he would do in the hands of an Aprilia or a Ducati if he manages to get a ride on one of those, like we suspect he might do. But positive, I think, overall for Honda. Bodes well for the year. This track can be, well, it is an outline. It can be tough, can't it? So it's just interesting to see that they've done well there. In terms of KTM, you've got Pedro, haven't you? It's the Pedro show. We touched on it already. Fantastic ride both days. Just seems to be gutting it out, aggressive and persistent. Doesn't get deterred if he gets back overtaken again and doesn't go backwards. He's just always pushing forwards, always aggressive, for the most part clean. And if he loses patience and he feels like he needs to put a move on someone because he wants to catch who's ahead, like we saw today in the main race, you just don't. You feel like it's an inevitability that he's gonna overtake. If KTM have managed to get something underneath him this year that gives him that confidence to battle, fantastic to see. Yeah, brilliant. Binder, solid, but again, outperformed by Pedro, and it doesn't look like he's going to be near him again unless something big changes. Maverick and Bastianini, I'm not sure what to say there. I was expecting a little bit more from Maverick, considering all this training you've seen. It's like Rocky montages, isn't it, with with Lorenzo? Just his spokesperson and coach is just fantastic. I can't believe that dynamic. I think it's a really interesting story going into the remainder of this season. You saw Lorenzo on the grid before the race if you were watching the TNT feed, and he almost seemed a little bit narked that Maverick wasn't closer to the front, considering Pedro was. Gotta love Lorenzo, man, and you just gotta love Pedro, haven't you? Like, he's just putting the cat amongst the pigeons every time. I think it was interesting. You saw him, are you proud with the win on the sprint? He didn't want it that way. He doesn't want to take his first top step on the podium in MotoGP when Mark has passed him. But it is sort of symbolic, isn't it? Mark was the aggressor and the aggressive young kid, and he had to wave him past today. Yesterday on the sprint. And it's just almost symbolic of that passing of the torch. So good to see them battling, Pedro and Mark. It's going to be amazing once they get on the same bike, if that's what ends up happening. In terms of Ducati, Mark, the benchmark, pardon the pun, I think he did really well this weekend. He looked like he was in pain. He looked like he wasn't particularly comfortable on the bike. Didn't look that smooth. It looked a bit fidgety going into corners, and obviously had terrible luck in the race today with that tyre coming off the rim. I've never seen that before, but he did hit the curb. Those curbs are a lot worse than they were years ago because of the way that they're built now. So, it could happen, I guess. I wonder if they'll have to pay a closer attention to that. But the Ducati squad seemed a little bit perplexed by that. Tough weekend for Mark overall because of, having to hand that position back yesterday. It was an aggressive move in the sprint to overtake Pedro from a little bit far back. Again, watching the TNT coverage, you got a lot of angles for it, and it was far back. But today you saw Pedro making those moves, arguably cleaner, But then Pedro wasn't willing to give ground yesterday, whereas some of the people Pedro made those moves on today were willing to give ground. So that is tough for me. We don't want to see hard racing outlawed. Tough job for Simon Crafar. But he seems to make decisions quickly and consistently. So we'll see how that pans out this year. Rest of Ducati, I mean, Pecco, mid-pack, battling with other Ducatis and Hondas. And, getting overtaken and gapped quite quickly by some riders on Aprilias and things like that. Doesn't look comfortable, doesn't look that happy. It doesn't you're not hearing from him as much now, and maybe that story is just going to continue from last year. At least he wasn't last, or really far down the order. The remaining sort of Ducati riders, interesting weekend really. I mean, Dijan Antonio I think was solid, and it looks like he's going to be really up there. I personally hope that he is the one that's battling at the front. Alex, tough weekend, obviously didn't finish today and had a really tough start to the race yesterday that meant he ended up finishing mid-pack again. You wonder if he had a better qualifying and better start, how well he'd do, because obviously he had such a strong season last year, Alex Marquez that is, but don't know. Morbidelli clinging onto the ride, right? I don't know what's going to happen with him this year and next year. I feel like a lot of anyone you listen to with an opinion on GP has sort of lost their patience with him. He's had such good opportunities in the paddock, and you wonder if he's going to maximise it again this year or if he's going to make silly mistakes. We'll have to see. Digia the strongest of the rest for me, apart from Mark, who was outstanding and just had a really unlucky weekend. So I really hope Digia can hold that together. Big favourite here at the channel, Dijan Antonio. I think he's had a really interesting story, and hopefully he'll be in the mix for a great ride in the next couple of years. A couple of years ago, on the verge of leaving. Obviously, Michele Pirro sort of making up the numbers at the end for Ducati, but solid weekend for him. I wonder if he was testing things for them. You never know. But I think he's extended his record. I forget the number of seasons now, but he's at least appeared in one race for a huge amount of consistent seasons now, Michele Pirro. So fair play. In terms of the final couple of manufacturers to break down, well, the last one, Aprilia. We touched on it already. That bike is seemingly the complete package now. We do know that it loves that rear composition tyre in these sorts of conditions. I think the track lends itself to the Aprilia as well, even if it wasn't in those hot conditions. Bez just walking it, making it look easy. Had however much on anyone else on the field today. Great to see Ayagura and Raul Fernandez up there, and super positive to see Jorge Martin. I mean, considering Martin hasn't had a pre-season, he's just been seemingly injured for about 9 years now at this. He's almost that forgotten guy. He had all that controversy last year where he was trying to force his way out of Aprilia, and you still get the feeling he's going to leave. But he's doing what he could with that bike this weekend. No pre-season, top fives both days. You can't argue with that. Considering this man, we've seen him getting off the Pramac Ducati back in the day in hot conditions and looking like he really struggled with those hot conditions, piping hot conditions, and on his fitness. No pre-season, coming off an injury, first proper race weekend, of the year. All the controversy around his future and what's going on with him and the Aprilia, and yet he puts in those performances. I think that bodes well. I mean, prior to 2 years ago, we would have said he's faster than Bez. So are they going to develop the bike in the direction of Bez? Probably. Well, they might as well now, considering he's just signed a new 2-year deal. But I think Martin, if he can stay injury-free, he's seems to be made of bloody China, doesn't he? Whenever he goes down, Martin. But again, Raul Fernandez, blimey, what a weekend for him. Couple of podiums. I thought it was interesting when Pedro caught him. He just couldn't put up a fight, really, could he? Although you could see the clear advantages that Aprilia has in corner entry and even in some of the other areas of the track. He just couldn't hold on to Pedro, could he? So I don't know. Interesting to see what happens there. But it's come at the right time, isn't it, Raul? Because he had a couple of years in MotoGP where is he good enough? He never really at the sharp end. Then he had that win last year, Phillip Island, I think. Starts the year this year with 2 podiums. Solid. Good to see that Trackhouse Golf livery at the front as well. Positive weekend all round for Aprilia. And you've got to wonder what's going to shake out with those rides. as we sort of see the grid confirming for 27 over the next couple of weeks. So to finish off, just some questions, and what we'll do down the line is we'll ask you to put questions in the comment section, and we'll answer the questions on the pod. We'll try and do them around the race, and just any questions on the industry as well. Any questions on racing generally, we can answer them under this MCF Racing sort of series. This MCF Racing series will cover reviews and previews of big races, talks about the news and things in the racing industry, any of those sorts of developments, and we'll also cover our own track day footage in here as well. Because we're going to try and do a few of those this year. But in terms of the questions, I wanted to answer one on Thailand and the circuit there. I mean, not always been a favourite circuit of mine, not something I think of at the beginning of the season, like looking forward to that race in Thailand at the Chang International Circuit. But I think, it makes for good racing, doesn't it? It makes for good racing. You see, the temperature adds to it, that rear composition tyre, as I say, and, some of the bikes doing better than others there. It makes for good racing. I think we've seen some good racing this weekend, so really positive. Looking forward to seeing it again next year. I mentioned I'd talk about Pecco and Pedro and the Ducati Aprilia sort of thing. We're hearing that Pedro's going to take Pecco's seat at Ducati, right? Sounds great on the first surface of it. Best team in the world, best bike in the world, and Pedro gets what he deserves, right? The best bike on the grid. Obviously, that's going to be good, and we've seen this weekend Pedro versus Marc is going to be very, very interesting. You wonder if he can match him mentally, Pedro, considering that's what Marc always does. He always dominates mentally, doesn't he? But then you've got this new developing thing where Pecco's talked about for seemingly already signed for Aprilia. And it then starts adding up. If this Aprilia continues to evolve this year and the bike they bring in 27 is better than the Ducati, then Pecco lands on the best bike on the grid and Pedro moves to something that's not quite the best. Very interesting dynamic there. I don't know how much this, clearly Pedro is bolstered by whatever he's doing outside of the track at the moment, because his race was fantastic. Racing was fantastic this weekend. Pecco mid-pack, arguably better than he was performing towards the end of last year, but, not looking great overall. You've got to wonder what's going to happen with it. So yeah, other questions I thought would be worthwhile discussing. Is Bez a real title contender? Might sound like a silly one. But, prior to this, if you're looking to place a bet, you're betting on Marc Marquez, right? And if you think it's going to be Pecco to challenge him, you've got to be wrong there. Is Pedro at the right tracks? You think the KTM might be able to do it, but you've got to think in normal conditions, the Ducati probably is going to be the most consistent package throughout the year. But Bez looks like he might have a lot more pace in a few different areas. We've seen the Aprilia level out the last few years. It's not only fast in some tracks, clearly a lot faster here today, but we wonder where we'll see in the next few races how well that will shake out. Very interested to see how it all shakes out with Aprilia, and I do think he is a title contender, Bez. I think, considering Marc, it only takes another crash for him to be knocked back a little bit. Obviously, touch wood, nothing happens like that. We don't wish that on anybody, but you never know. He's not the rider he once was, because he's been through so much, Marc. And Bez looks hungry for it and confident and happy at that team. He's married his bike, so it must be pretty happy. How do you judge Top Rack's weekend? That was another thing. Obviously, we're huge World Superbike fans here. World Superbike will not be the same without him. We covered that the other day. Yeah, difficult, isn't it? This weekend, he's fighting not only to learn a bike, he's fighting to learn a new bike that the team are learning about themselves, and it's slower than everyone on the field. Tough one. I think he's done a solid result for what I can see. He looked like he could outperform Jack Miller and Rins in places, and that bodes well. If he was on a fast bike, if he wasn't something consistent, perhaps we'll see better. But yeah, all in all, first weekend for him pretty decent is my sort of takeaway. Last one I've got is who will be the last non-factory Ducati, the fastest non-factory Ducati this year. I don't think it's going to be Alex. I'm hoping, and it is hope, it's with my heart, not my head, that it's Gian Antonio. I think he deserves it more than anyone. He struggled last year, but you've got to point a little bit to that Ducati, the 25 Ducati that he was on last year not being fantastic. You saw that for Pecco as well. He outperformed every other Ducati rider this weekend. Yeah, I mean, not hardly a hot take to say that I think he'll be the best this year, considering he was the best of the rest this weekend. But that was my feeling going into this weekend, and I feel if he's got the bike under him, I think he can outperform your Alex Marquez's, your Morbidellis, you know, the rest of the guys. Obviously, the returning Gresini rider as well. We'll be back soon. So yeah. All in all, fantastic weekend of racing. Absolutely, you know, whet the appetite for the rest of the season. You know, loads of different things that we weren't expecting happening. That dominance from Aprilia at the front of the field is clearly the biggest story. But you had controversy in that sprint race yesterday. You've got, you know, the rising star of Pedro. And Pecco again just falling away. There's some real good storylines in there. But yeah, that Aprilia is the bike to beat seemingly at the moment. Anyway, listen, like, subscribe, make sure you follow us on Instagram and YouTube. There'll be more content coming soon. Keep your eyes peeled for more reviews, more previews, more racing news and those sorts of things. We'll be doing shorts to sort of talk about little news stories that come out as the week progresses. And yeah, keep your eyes peeled for more. Anyway, thanks again.